6:17 a.m. The world changes in a single, silent flash. Too bright for the human eye, but unmistakable to the satellites drifting hundreds of miles above the Earth. A point of heat, a bloom of radiation, a signature that has only one meaning in the modern world. In underground command centers, screens shift from green to red. Operators pause with their hands still hovering above keyboards. A single confirmation message appears. It is quiet, clinical, final, detonation confirmed. Across the United States, the morning continues as if nothing has happened. Coffee makers drip. School buses hiss their brakes. A dog barks at a passing jogger. The ordinary rhythm of American life pulses forward, unaware that somewhere, far beyond sight or sound, the air itself has changed. The camera drifts through this normalcy with a quiet, hovering patience. 6:21 a.m. Every phone vibrates at once. A shutter moves through neighborhoods like an invisible tide. Screens flash white. The emergency alert system activates nationally. Its tone flat, mechanical, stripped of emotion. Radios cut mid-song into the same message. Televisions turn black, then display the alert in stark lettering. Confirmed nuclear strike. Shelter immediately. Further instructions to follow. The first reaction is disbelief. Not fear. Not panic. Confusion. People freeze mid-step. A teacher unlocking a classroom door stares down at her phone. A man shaving stops with the razor pressed lightly against his cheek. Drivers slow as notifications light their dashboards. The world is still moving, but human thought isn't. The message feels impossible, a scene from a documentary they watched once, not a sentence intended for them. 6:40 a.m. The silence breaks. Highways jam. Parents turn their cars around. Gas stations overflow with vehicles pressing in from every direction. Crowds gather outside convenience stores, scanning the sky, scanning their screens, scanning the faces of strangers for answers no one has. Some begin driving with no destination in mind, only the instinct to flee. But movement is the first mistake. Fallout patterns are still unknown. Winds are shifting. Roads are becoming corridors of exposure. The narrator's voice remains steady as the camera lifts into an aerial shot of congested highways. In the first hours after a nuclear detonation, the greatest threat is not radiation. It is confusion. 7:15 a.m. Communication networks falter. Calls fail. Messages load halfway, then freeze. Social media erupts with rumors. Multiple detonations. Incoming missiles. Entire cities gone. None of it confirmed. All of it accelerating fear. The camera moves into a living room lit only by the glow of a dying television feed. The broadcaster's voice breaks in and out, static slicing through phrases. Not evacuate, repeat, shelter. The message is unclear. The pressure rises quietly in the room, like air tightening. Power fluctuates in scattered regions. Lights blink once, twice, then hold. The national grid strains under sudden, uneven load. The hum of refrigerators, heaters, traffic lights. The background noise of civilization. Feels thinner than usual, more fragile. 8 a.m. Sheltering begins. Families drag mattresses against interior walls. Tape seals the edges of windows. Towels are wedged under doors. Sinks fill with water. Bathtubs too. Every container becomes a reservoir. People turn off ventilation units that pull air from outside, unsure whether external particles have reached their neighborhoods yet, but unwilling to take chances. Basements become lifelines. Interior hallways turn into makeshift bunkers. School gymnasiums transform into emergency shelters lit with battery lanterns. The visual tone softens into dim grays and muted blues, the color palette of precaution. 10 a.m. Fallout projections arrive. Federal agencies transmit the first atmospheric models. The maps appear on battery-powered radios in the form of spoken regions and coordinates. Winds are carrying debris eastward. Highways in certain zones are labeled unsafe. Evacuation is not advised. Movement may increase exposure. The narrator describes this in a near whisper. The instinct to flee is powerful. But in these hours, stillness is survival. The camera glides along an interstate where hundreds of cars sit motionless. Some drivers stand outside, looking at their phones with growing helplessness. Others sit silently behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel as though force alone could move the traffic. Exposure settles invisibly around them. 12 p.m. The panic slows. Not because fear diminishes, but because there is nowhere left to go. People retreat indoors. Doors close. Curtains shut. A country that once prided itself on motion becomes a nation of dimly lit shelters. Inside those rooms, something new emerges. A heavy, thick quiet. It presses against the walls. It hums beneath the floor. Radios become the heartbeat of the home, voices cracking through static, repeating instructions, repeating coordinates, repeating common words but urgency in tone. Families sit close, not speaking unless necessary. The air is warm, recycled. Time stretches. Hunger appears not as an emergency, but as a reminder that the familiar world has paused. A single flashlight beam flickers across a living room. A child whispers. An adult shushes softly, not out of annoyance, but out of instinct. To keep the room steady, controlled, anchored, the narrator's voice descends lower. In the first hour, the world changed. In the 12th, it begins to understand what that change means. What comes next will test not strength, but patience. Not resources, but clarity. Outside, the streets lie empty under a pale midday haze. Sirens echo from far-off neighborhoods, distant enough to feel unreal. Wind carries a faint metallic odor through cracks in old window frames. A dog barks once, then falls silent. The section closes with a slow shot of closed front door, taped, sealed, unmoving. And in that silence, something irreversible begins. Hour 13. Afternoon arrives without the color of afternoon. The sky dims into a muted gray, as if dust has climbed high enough to steal the sun. Streets that should echo with weekday noise lie still, their silence carrying farther than sound ever did. Power grids falter block by block. First a flicker, then a soft, final click as refrigerators, heaters, and lights surrender to the strain. In living rooms across the nation, the hum of modern life goes quiet. The narrator's voice remains steady. A country built on electricity begins learning how to live without it. Inside shelters, the air feels heavier than before. Not toxic, just close. Stale. Hours have passed without fresh circulation. Families sit along walls, conserving energy the way they conserve every other resource now. The pacing slows, mirroring the psychological shift from shock to endurance. The camera moves through dim rooms lit by flashlight beams drifting over shelves filled with hastily gathered supplies. Hour 18. Rationing begins almost without discussion. A single can opener becomes a communal tool. A single loaf of bread becomes a calculation. Households examine their supplies under narrow columns of light. The narrator quietly observing how fast the illusion of abundance collapses. Most American homes hold less than 3 days of food. Survival depends not on what is stored, but on how slowly it is used. Forks scrape lightly against tin. Water bottles crack open with deliberate hesitations. Meals become symbolic. Small portions, slow chewing, longer silence. Hour 20. Hygiene becomes its own battlefield. The plumbing still works in some regions, but pressure is weakening. Toilets flush inconsistently, each time sounding more strained. Showers remain untouched. Sinks run only when absolutely necessary. The camera lingers on people washing hands with a single damp cloth, each movement quiet, methodical, almost ritualistic. Trash bags tie off in corners. Their accumulation threatens not sight or smell yet, but morale. Illness becomes an invisible threat hovering at the edges of every decision. The narrator's tone holds steady. In crisis, even small infections become large dangers. Hour 24. The first full day ends. A nation accustomed to movement becomes one forced into stillness. Highways lie abandoned except for vehicles stranded after the early morning panic. Gas stations stand empty with lights off, pumps frozen mid-sail. Airports remain in complete shutdown, runways barren under the dim sky. Train stations sit silent, their timetable screens flickering with outdated information. The world's most connected country is now motionless. A nation meant to move the narrator breathes, is now a nation forced to wait. Hour 30. Information collapses. With cell networks unreliable and power outages spreading, people turn to anything that carries a signal. Battery radios become lifelines. But even these crackle, distort, fall into static. In the absence of clarity, rumor becomes currency. One neighborhood whispers of a second detonation. Another hears that foreign jets crossed the coast hours ago. Another believes the initial strike was an accident. The camera shifts between households, capturing the same posture everywhere. Heads bent over radios, brows tense, listening for certainty in the crackling void. No certainty comes. Hour 36. Night falls for the second time since the detonation, but this night is different. The grid collapses more deeply, more widely. Entire cities go dark, their skylines erased. The silhouette of America becomes a faint outline of quiet neighborhoods, each one flickering with the occasional candle or battery lantern. The documentary moves through empty streets. No cars, no voices, no lights, only wind, only shadows, only the distant echo of sirens that never seem to approach. The night arrives with no city lights, the narrator says. And in that darkness, the fear grows sharper. Hour 40. Communities begin to whisper through the dark. Neighbors knock in soft, cautious patterns. Radios are shared. Flashlights exchanged. Information traded. Supplies compared. Old fences that once separated households become points of connection. Cooperation forms not out of hope, but out of necessity. The camera lingers on hands passing batteries across doorways, notes scribbled on torn paper, candles lit between two households. In silence, unity begins. Hour 48. 2 days have passed. The metallic haze in the air lifts slightly, not enough for comfort, but enough for vision. Emergency broadcasts grow clearer, offering structured updates. Fallout zones, evacuation maps, safe corridors, medical tent locations. The narrator's tone shifts from observation to surgical precision. The next hours present a new threat. Not radiation, not panic. Timing. Move too early, and evacuees enter zones still shedding contamination. Move too late, and supplies run thin, routes close, hospitals overflow. Sheltering is no longer the only option, but neither is escape. Families listen to radios with renewed intensity. Communities gather in basements to interpret the maps. The tension rises again, quiet but sharp. The section ends with a slow shot of a radio speaker, vibrating softly as a voice repeats coordinates. The next 24 hours will decide who stays and who must go. Hour 49. The door opens for the first time in 2 days. It moves slowly, as if the air on the other side carries weight. A thin sheet of light slips across the floor, not bright, not warm, but pale and dust-filtered. A figure steps out, wrapped in layered clothing, face covered with cloth, movements deliberate. The world outside is quiet in a way no American city has ever been. Streets look familiar, yet drained of life, washed in a gray sheen of fine particles. Cars sit exactly where they were abandoned. Playgrounds lie empty. Mailboxes, fences, storefronts. Every object seems caught between normalcy and ruin. The narrator's voice is steady, almost reverent. The air is not the threat it was. But the world it reveals is no longer the one they knew. Hour 52. Communities begin to form in the open. Neighbors approach each other with cautious steps, each holding radios, printed emergency notes, maps marked with pen scratches. They gather in small groups at the ends of cul-de-sacs, near fences, beside stairwells. Conversations are quiet, almost whisper-like. They compare fallout readings, interpret official broadcasts, estimate which areas are safer, which are fading, which are still unfit for travel. Slow alliances appear. One household has extra water. One has a working shortwave radio. One has medical training. Another knows how to repair generators. The camera captures hands passing items between neighbors, batteries, candles, small bags of rice. Simple exchanges forming the foundation of survival. The narrator speaks with calm certainty. In disaster, communities do not form because people are strong. They form because isolation is not an option. Hour 56. Movement begins again, But it is nothing like the chaotic flight of the first day. This time it is slow, intentional, nearly silent. People cover themselves in layers, scarves over mouths, goggles over eyes, jackets pulled tight. They move in small groups, heads down, steps rehearsed. No one runs. No one shouts. Running is panic. Panic is exposure. The roads tell the story of the panic that came before. Cars frozen in all directions, doors left open, personal belongings scattered across asphalt, a child's backpack, a spilled grocery sack, a jacket tangled in weeds. The remnants of the first morning's fear remain untouched. Some evacuees walk between abandoned vehicles, following updated maps broadcast at dawn. Others remain behind, sheltering in safe zones where fallout readings have dropped below severe thresholds. The narrator's tone turns analytical. Movement is no longer about escape. It is about precision. Hour 60. Inside neighborhoods that remain shelter, committees begin to form. Informal but essential. Radios must be monitored. Water must be rationed. Supplies inventoried. Elders checked on. Children reassured. A rotation for nightly watches is quietly established by those who volunteer, not out of fear of violence, but out of the need to observe the world outside, to read the silence, to catch the faint changes others might miss. The narrator's voice becomes reflective. Society has not collapsed. It has condensed. It has shrunk to the size of living rooms, cul-de-sacs, and human necessity. Hour 64. Patterns begin to emerge across the country. In some regions, early aid arrives. Convoys of emergency vehicles, medical tents rising near community centers, temporary power units humming in parking lots. In others, the silence remains total. Drones sweep the skies above major cities. National Guard units mark safe corridors. Federal agencies analyze soil, air, and water. This is not restoration. It is assessment, stabilization, a blueprint for what comes next, drafted in real time. The camera lingers on a relief worker, handing a bottle of water to a child wrapped in a blanket, on a doctor disinfecting a small makeshift clinic, on a soldier placing a hand on a frightened civilian's shoulder. The narrator does not glorify, does not dramatize. A nation does not recover in a day. It learns how to stand. Hour 70. The psychological climax arrives quietly. Families sit together outside their shelters for the first time, breathing air that still tastes metallic but does not sting. Some stare at the horizon, watching the haze shift into softer shades. Others sort the belongings with slow, deliberate gestures, deciding what is essential, what is replaceable, what is now part of the past. Children ask questions with too much innocence for the answers. When do we go back to school? When will the lights turn on again? Is this over? Adults pause before responding. Survival has become more than a task. It has become a mindset, a new framework, a recalibration of what life means when an invisible threat above every household finally begins to recede. Hour 72. Dawn rises through the haze with a muted orange glow. There is no dramatic sunrise, only a quiet shifting of the horizon, a slow brightening that feels cautious, as if the sky itself is unsure of its return. Radios hum with messages that no longer sound like emergency declarations. They sound like structure, strategy, recovery pathways. The national voice steadies. And then, distant but unmistakable, the rumble of engines. Convoys approach suburbs and rural roads. Relief teams arrive with water, medical care, stabilized routes, and the first confident information the nation has heard since the strike. Families step outside their shelters together, not in fear, but in fragile readiness. Doors that remained sealed for 3 days now swing open in unison across neighborhoods. Streets fill not with panic, but with careful, reverent movement. The narrator speaks in a deep, measured tone. The first 72 hours do not end the crisis. They end the disbelief. What begins now as survival, not as reaction, but as reality. The camera pulls upward, rising above quiet neighborhoods, above abandoned highways, above the dust-covered land. The sky is still gray. The air is still heavy. The world is still changed. But humanity is standing. A final line settles into the silence like a closing breath. In the stillness after the flash, a new world begins, one built not for what was lost, but from what remains.